You may have seen the news that Bob Weir, who's the co-founder of the Grateful Dead, had died earlier this week. Today's conversation is a tribute to Bob Weir and everything that he gave to music. And it's a conversation with Dan Kanter. And here's what I want you to know about Dan Kanter going in. Dan Kanter is sort of a multi-instrumentalist. He's worked with a lot of different musicians, including Justin Bieber, Ariana Grande, Shawn Mendes, sort of musicians that you think of more in the pop realm. But also Dan had a pretty close relationship with Bob. And what I really liked about this conversation is the ways that Dan is able to bridge those two worlds, right? This idea of like the worlds of, a very rigid kind of big pop show. And also what Bob Weir does, which is sort of like these sort of exploratory, improvisational kind of relationships to music. And Dan kind of so perfectly put the ways to bridge those two things, because everything that they had sort of in common kind of came out on stage. He talked about how Bob Weir loved to share the stages with musicians who were older, who were younger, and just give them this relationship to music that's just a little bit more relaxed and a bit more open. And Dan sort of so perfectly articulated that. I can't wait for you to hear this conversation. Get into it. Dan, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I want to start by just saying sorry for your loss, man. I'm really grateful for you taking the time to talk about your friend, but also, do you want to talk a little bit about the shirt that you're wearing in honor of Bob Weir today?
Well, thank you. I appreciate your condolences. This one hurts really deep. And my shirt, I collect vintage rock shirts. So primarily Metallica and Grateful Dead. I don't know if there could be a further difference, but this one is, I think it's from the 30th anniversary. So that would be 95. And of course, it's like the Grateful Dead Dancing Bears.
Tell me about what went through your mind when you first heard that Bob Weir died.
Well, I knew he was sick, but when he died, it was really sad. It was, I've definitely been hit hard by musicians passing, most recently Ozzy, who I'm a huge fan of. But, Bob, it's on a whole other level because, of course, like I'm really close with him and his family. And also just what he means to so many of my family and friends. And, he is like, the last living, one of them of that whole thing. So yeah, it was really sad. End of an era.
I want to talk a little bit about the closeness that you have with Bob and his family, but maybe let's rewind a little bit. So you were working as Justin Bieber's musical director, touring with Bieber. That's when you first meet Bob Weir. Take me back to that meeting. What was that like?
Yeah. Well, when I was on tour with Justin, there was always like a pre-show meet and greet. It was a mix of like VIPs, radio winners, record label, and everyone would get in this like long line, to get this photo op with him. And then they would be sent to this like waiting room in the arena for like, dinner and prizes. And sometimes that line would be 200-300 people long, and the waiting room would be like an hour before the show. So, if there was someone cool coming after sound check, I would go to that line and go meet them and, keep them company, sometimes even in that waiting room. And like through that, I had like crazy, you could imagine the people that would bring like kids or nieces. I got to meet and hang with like Johnny Depp and Duff McKagan from Guns N' Roses, and my first real hero, Steve Eiserman, for sure. And so when I heard that Bobby was coming, of course I was going to go to the line. And it's funny, like with Bieber, his fans loved him so much they like knew who the band was. Like I was like a weird consolation prize, I guess, in being movie. So, like the kids would be excited to see me, and then like secretly inside, I'm like freaking out to meet their dad. And so I had a really like special hang with Bob and his family, and that like really grew into such a special relationship since that night.
I love that description, by the way, that image of like, okay, the fathers are bringing their children to go, like they're really excited about the show. And then the children are excited that you're there because they're recognizing you from all the Bieber sort of content.
Sure.
And then you're like, I'm actually really excited about your father being here. Like this is a whole sort of circle of excitement. That sounds really lovely.
For sure. Totally. But with Bob in particular, like, it really grew to like an incredible relationship with his wife and his daughter, specifically Monet, is like a little sister to me. So,
Can we
yeah.
talk a little bit about Bob's role in the band? Because I think that's something that people might not necessarily like fully grasp, because the Grateful Dead do sort of operate as like a whole unit. So there's something to be said about Bob's role in the band. So you've been a huge fan of the Grateful Dead. You've been a huge fan of
Yep.
Bob Weir your whole life. Tell me what kind of role this band, the Grateful Dead, played in your life. And then also, what did he do for the band?
That's a great question. I mean, the Grateful Dead means so much to me, and my family and friends. That music and going to the shows and like the path that they laid for other bands like them, like Fish, is such a huge part of how my family and my friends and I connect. And like people that I love so much, we all like convene on one city for this like shared concert experience.
Yeah.
And, of course, like with the Dead, I love the music, I love the lyrics, I love playing those songs. It's the greatest American songbook
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
And then when you think about Bob's role in the Grateful Dead, because listen, people who have seen the Grateful Dead play, people who've seen Dead and Company play,
Yeah.
what they're watching is a sort of a dance between a whole bunch of different people who are sort of trying to blend together into one thing. And all of that is hard enough to do, but then you got Bob at the center of all of this. So tell me what Bob's role was, just as sort of a unique place in the
Sure.
Grateful Dead.
That's a great question. I mean, Bob was such a unique guitar player. He was essentially a rhythm guitar player, but he didn't play like one. His parts were extremely unique. He used all these, thousands of chord inversions, such an interesting tone. And, I think with Bobby, especially in that band, while he was, sometimes like up at the center, flipping his hair and, being a heartthrob, I guess, in the early days, he was also so selfless because he was there to support, Jerry soloing and like be almost like a voice in an orchestral accompaniment. So, in a way, his playing was so egoless and like like Pippin to Jordan, I guess.
That's a really beautiful sort of analogy. It's also like there's something about the reverence that you have for him as you sort of like describe him in that role. As you got to know him as a person after that sort of first initial meeting, what was he like as a person?
I mean, Bobby was amazing. Like his family and him were always like so welcoming to my wife and I and wonderful. And Bob would go on these like long spacey tangents that like if you followed them they would be so like deep and inspirational. And I musical direct pop concerts, which are, they're like Broadway. That's like the approach. And so he would always like encourage me as a friend and outside of that to, do improvisational music, take chances, not be so, perfectionist and be rough around the edges. Like I remember one night after the Hollywood Bowl in LA shows, we went to an after party and I had just got this like beautiful brand new like wide brim fedora from this like famous milliner in Venice Beach. And like, this hat wasn't cheap and I was stoked to wear it. And I walk in and Bob sees me and he like walks over immediately and like takes it off my head and starts like bending it and roughing it up to like look like his cowboy hat,
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, he was like such an inspiring person, and I feel grateful that we were friends and that I got to play with him.
What a perfect analogy, hey? Like this idea of like, here's this hat that you got from a famous milliner, and then he's like, yeah, but it needs to look a little more lived in than it does right now, and then he sort of
Exactly.
takes it upon himself, right, to sort of do that. I really love that image. You ended up getting a bunch of opportunities to play with Bob over the years, and we play, you played with him not that long ago. We have a clip from Instagram. Let's just have a listen to this.
Ripple in still water where there is no pebble tossed, no wind to blow.
Dan, was that the hat? First of all, I gotta ask that question. Was
No, different hat. It had a much wider brim.
all right, good to know. But take me about that moment. What's it like making music with Bob Weir?
Yeah, I mean, it was like incredibly surreal
Mm.
and like exciting, and I knew in the moment how meaningful it was, but I also like remember trying to control that excitement and be super present, like whether we were like on stage or backstage or like recently I was in a hotel room in Denver just jamming with him. Like he is all in. And so he's soulful and focused, and like it was incredible to be on that journey like of exploration when he's like changing around the tune.
Hmm.
And I guess like playing with him since he's mostly like a rhythm guitar player, I would be kind of doing Jerry's Garcia's lead role. So, trying to like be myself, but also stay true and respectful to that tradition. But, that balance of like freaking out, like, I can't believe I'm playing with Bob Weir, and also like really trying to be present and in the music and enjoy it.
I love this image that you're painting of this idea of like you're both on the stage and on the like in the balcony, just being like, hang on for just a moment, I am on stage with Bob Weir. Like, oh my God, look at that! And then also sort of trying to meet him in that place. And also from the way that you talk about him, you sort of talk about this sort of improvisational, this sort of like fun-loving person who's sort of just like excited to kind of go with the flow. You had a moment on stage in Toronto with him where he did his own thing. Do you want to talk a little bit about that
Oh
moment?
yeah. Yeah, yeah. He was doing an acoustic show in Toronto, and he called me up and asked me if I would come out, in the middle of the show and do 6 songs. And he sent me the list of 6 songs, and I kind of knew them, but like I play for a professional pop artist, so I like studied it and did my homework and I prepared. And then we're on stage playing, and it was like exciting because it's my hometown. Well, I'm from Ottawa, but I live in Toronto, and all my friends and family are there, and we're jamming, and we're in this like improvisational space. And I kind of, even though we're jamming, like I know the set, the song, so I know where it's going to end up. And then at one point he breaks into this tune, and the whole audience has that like, I love this song, and I have that moment like, I love this song. And then like I realize this wasn't on the list, Bob. And I felt like the coyote, like hanging over the cliff. I was like, Bob, you threw me under the bus. But I knew it, like kind of like I faked my way through it and got to the other side. But like, honestly, I have like a sneaking suspicion that he did that on purpose. I never asked him, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Oh, did you guys talk about it afterwards, or were you like,
No,
Bob? You didn't go, Bob. What was that?
no. I mean, I'm all in.
Yeah. What was the song, by the way? Just for
It was
curiosity.
Birdsong.
Nice. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think it was Birdsong.
In the obituary that his family shared, they wrote, Bobby will forever be a guiding force whose unique artistry reshaped American music. You see that influence very directly in the way they started to collaborate with a lot of younger collaborators, people like John Mayer, Brandon Carlisle, Maggie Rogers, Tyler Childers. How would you describe his legacy, the thing that he sort of has managed to pass on to future generations?
Yeah, that's a great question. Bobby never stopped evolving. Like after the Grateful Dead, he did. I'm gonna miss some, but like the Dead and Rat Dog, Further, Dead and Co. He did these orchestral projects.
Yeah.
And he kept reinventing the music instead of like freezing it in time. And everything from like jam bands to like the touring culture now and like festivals like Coachella, Bonnaroo, like this is all traced back to like the Grateful Dead's approach. And I think, they showed artists that you don't have to chase hit songs to be successful.
Hmm.
And that music and the approach, the ethos, like you just said, is being passed on to all these musicians of multiple generations. I mean, most obviously like John Mayer. God bless John Mayer for carrying the torch so incredibly, and I hope he continues to. And and to your point, like it was actually really interesting and beautiful on Instagram in the hundreds of tribute posts. Someone passes away, right? And you see a flutter of all these posts from people to Bobby. And in 99% of those, it's actually pictures of people playing on stage with him
Yeah.
who are, most of them younger. So I thought that was really incredible.
Yeah, I was really struck by that as well. Like very, very few of those were like, oh, we're just kind of sitting in a room somewhere. It feels like all of these sort of young musicians actually had a chance to play with him. Like there were these opportunities that they got, like
Totally.
yeah.
Sorry, I'm interrupting, but there's like pictures of him, not just with like, the Maggie Rogers and John Mayers of the world, but like in like a bar shack playing with people, and you could just like see his fire, and he's all in. Like I don't think I'm there must be a stat, but like I don't think anyone has played maybe either more shows or for more people than Bob Weir.
I'll say that the two images I saw sort of back to back were Bob Dylan posting a picture of Bob and Jerry and Bob Dylan sort of playing together, and so and then also at the same time saw the Bryan Carlisle photo sort of posting this really lovely tribute, and it's again not this sort of like here we are sort of backstage somewhere where we ran into each other. They're playing together. They're sort of on the stage at the same time, and it just kind of struck me like the range of musicians, but also the range of time. Like the idea that like Bob Weir has been playing on stages with musicians from all generations for as long as he has. You sort of pointed out, you're an interesting bridge, Dan, because you sort of professionally play and sort of sit right next to professional pop artists who I would say like are a bit more structured in the ways that they approach their music. And then also you had this relationship with Bob Weir. You work in this space as well. So for you, as you kind of like think about this, there's not a lot of people who said the Venn diagram between Justin Bieber and Bob Weir. In fact, it would just be just you. What is the thing that professional pop artists can learn from the flexibility and fluidity in the ways that Bob Weir approach music?
I mean, that's such a great question. I could speak for, Justin Bieber in particular, like in my time with him. Justin, was I mean, he is so talented. And one of the things I think, that he's always done that really shows, his how talented he is he has these like incredible pop productions with all the bells and whistles. And then he has these acoustic performances. And we, would always do those, as many dance and lights and lasers, we would do these acoustic shows. And so, he would, at these acoustic shows, go out with no set list. It would be sitting in the middle of, Staples Center, now Crypto, and just with an acoustic. And I think like that in a way was his way of like, being free from the full production, and those big pop shows have to be that way because, there's trap doors and explosions. It's very timed, but it was really cool to see with him. And, for me, like just to go out and on stage, similar to the Dead, say like, what do you want to play right now? Or, no click track. This one was faster tonight. Oh, let's speed up here, slow down here. I think for Justin, and he still does those acoustic shows, that like gave him a lot of freedom, and it was a good yin and yang from, the big mega shows.
One of the earliest performances I've seen you do is you and Justin sort of doing Wheat Kings acoustically, and I think about that performance quite a bit. It's a really beautiful performance. I want to play a moment from an interview that Bob Weir did a couple of years ago. Let's hear it.
I don't tend to think of death as particularly final, and I also, if I'm going to be sad, that's my business, because really death is a liberation. My view of things is that death is the last and best reward for a life well lived.
Death is the last and best reward for a life well lived. How does that resonate with you now, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I saw that clip a few days ago, and I think someone actually put it over this like beautiful ethereal music with like space in the background. And yeah, it's beautiful and it's profound, and it makes me feel, more hopeful, I guess, about my own mortality, and I want to believe it. And yeah, I hope he's jamming with Jerry Garcia and Phil right now.
It sounds like from not just from the other sort of tributes, but from what you said about the idea of like Bob was often going on these beautiful tangents that land somewhere, that he was someone who was so like full of wisdom, and so just kind of like freely kind of shared it. Is there something that he said to you that you kind of keep returning to right now? Not just about music, but I guess maybe just about life in general.
Yeah, when I work on a show, I'm very locked in on the outcome. Like I have tunnel vision on my plan and what needs to happen to get to the show. And he would like to, tell me to like trust the process and enjoy the process and also like explore the process instead of just like racing to the finish line. And I learned from being with him that in that process, that's where sometimes the magic happens, not just on like my set plan. And so yeah, I even like think about that now with my kids. I have 3 kids, and like bedtime is like super chaotic. And sometimes I feel like I'm just nagging them, like brush your teeth, get in your pajamas. I'm like only focused on like when they're all sleeping. And I guess like I miss that critical time with them, that special time, that's happening like right now, and I'll never get back, and will go by so quickly. So, yeah, I think that.
Thanks for that. I'm gonna think about that the next time I'm doing bedtime. It's chaotic, also. So
it's harder. It's hard.
I only have one, and I appreciate that lesson. Look, Dan, but I can't let you go without asking about your favorite song. Let's just have a listen to this.
Sugar magnolia, blossoms blooming, heads all empty and I don't care. So my baby down by the river, knew she'd have to come up soon for air.
Sugar Magnolia, that is your choice. Why is this one your favorite?
I love the music and the lyrics. I love Bobby's like sweet voice in it. He's usually like raspier. And it's just like very Grateful Dead. It's about like letting go and being in the moment and like trusting where that moment takes you.
Dan, I really appreciate your time and I appreciate that answer. Thank you so much for being here today, man.
Thank you. It's been, like I said, special to chat about Bobby. So thank you.
Of course, absolutely. Dan Kanter is a musical director and multi-instrumentalist who's worked with Justin Bieber, Ariana Grande, and Shawn Mendes, and more. He was also one of Bob Weir's friends. The Grateful Dead co-founder died on Saturday. He was 78 years old. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. We'll see you tomorrow.